I was brewing tea in my Chicago apartment when my phone lit up. A short message from my mother glowed on the screen. This year, just your brother's family. No context, no call, not even a question mark. I stood there for a moment, the warm mug pressed between my palms, and typed back one word that felt colder than it looked. Fine. What they didn't know, what they had never once thought to ask, was that I owned a $1.8 million property sitting quietly at the edge of a lake in rural Maine. And this time, I wasn't going to spend the holiday waiting for someone to remember me. My name is Claire. I'm 35, and for most of my life, I've moved through the world the way my family trained me to. Quietly, carefully, never asking for too much. People tell me I seem grounded, that I carry myself with a kind of stillness that makes others feel at ease. What they don't see is where that stillness came from. It came from learning early that the more space someone else took up, the less I was allowed to take. I grew up in a neat neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where lawns were trimmed on Sundays and everybody knew your name. Inside our house, though, roles had been decided long before I understood what was happening. My mother, Carol, loved my younger brother, Kyle, in a way that wasn't subtle. Her voice went soft for him and tight for me. My father, Robert, wasn't a harsh man, just selectively blind. He valued effort, but mine always seemed to fall just short of counting. I remember being 9 years old, washing dishes alone while my mother drove Kyle to baseball practice. I remember bringing his missed schoolwork during his suspension. I remember calling my parents the night I found him barely conscious on his bathroom floor. My mother's first words weren't "thank you." They were, "Why didn't you call sooner?" When Kyle came home from his second stint in rehab, the house was decorated. Balloons, a cake, the neighbors stopped by. When I graduated top of my class the following spring, my mother left a plate of cookies on the counter and said, "I know you prefer things low-key." I used to believe that if I stayed steady enough, patient enough, they'd eventually look my way. But in my family, attention was a beam of light that only followed Kyle. When I got engaged at 28, the pattern showed up again without even trying. My mother asked me to shift the date because it landed close to Kyle's birthday. At the engagement dinner, he arrived an hour and a half late with a group of friends, loud music trailing behind him. My then fiancé, Marcus, looked at me from across the table with an expression I'll never forget. Confused, quietly devastated. He didn't stay long after that. And honestly, the version of me who kept insisting everything was manageable didn't last much longer either. Last Thanksgiving was the moment I should have paid attention to. I brought someone new, a soft-spoken architect named Daniel, who actually listened when I talked. My mother seated us at a small table near the kitchen. Easier for space, she said, though 3 chairs at the main table sat empty all evening. When I mentioned I'd just been promoted to regional director, Dad nodded once, then turned to Kyle and asked how his freelance work was coming along. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and said nothing. On the drive home, he told me, quietly, that I deserved better than what I kept accepting. He wasn't wrong, but patterns built over decades don't loosen just because someone names them. So when my mother's message arrived this year, just your brother's family, I didn't feel the sharp sting I once would have. It landed with a dull, settled weight, like confirmation of something I'd already known but hadn't let myself say out loud. A door closing with barely a sound. No hesitation, no apology. I set my phone down and stood in my kitchen for a long moment, listening to the rain against the window, the hum of the refrigerator, the ordinary quiet of a life that was entirely mine. And something in me shifted, not dramatically, just a slow, clean loosening. The version of me who always made herself smaller, who always found a way to understand their behavior, who always left space for their comfort before her own, stepped quietly to the side. And the silence that came after didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like room. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up a file I'd visited many times but never acted on quite like this. Lakeview Property, Maine transfer documents. My great-uncle Raymond had signed the property over to me 7 years ago. He was a quiet man who paid attention, which made him rare in my family. He used to say, "Claire, you hold things together without anyone noticing. Somebody should notice." When he passed, the estate went to me. The rest of the family assumed it had been sold. No one asked, no one looked into it. It sat on 4 acres beside a wide, still lake. The house had 6 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch, and a dock that groaned pleasantly in the wind. I'd been paying the taxes for years, spending long weekends there alone in winter, breathing. I looked at the map on my screen for a long time. The blue stretch of lake, the winding road, the house tucked behind the tree line. And then the thought arrived, clear and unhurried. I don't need their table. I'll build my own. I opened a blank document and typed guest list. The first name was Aunt Patrice. She had always found me in the middle of family gatherings, looped her arm through mine and asked, "How are you actually doing?" with a look that meant she wanted the honest answer. When I texted her, her reply came in under 2 minutes. "Just tell me when. I'll bring pie and wine and absolutely nothing else." Next was my cousin Joel. We'd drifted apart over the years, but I remembered the afternoon Kyle had a loud meltdown at a family barbecue, and Joel had pulled me aside quietly and said, "You deal with so much. I see it." When I called him now, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thanksgiving without the usual chaos? I'm already looking up flights." Then came Priya, my closest friend, who had sat with me on my kitchen floor the night Marcus left and didn't say a word until I was ready to talk. I sent her a short message. She sent back a screenshot of a booked flight and one sentence, "Finally choosing the right table." The last name gave me pause. Maisie, my 7-year-old niece, Kyle's daughter. She had her father's eyes, but nothing else of his restlessness. She used to climb onto my lap at family dinners and whisper things she'd drawn in her notebook. Little houses with smoke curling from chimneys, always with Aunt Claire written carefully at the bottom. I sent a simple message to her mother, Renee, not expecting much. She called within the hour. "Maisie saw your message," she said, voice low. "She asked if she could write you a letter. And I want you to know if there's room, I'd really like to come too." I closed my eyes. "There's plenty of room," I said, "for both of you." That night, I packed a bag, booked a one-way flight to Portland, and didn't look at my phone again until morning. I arrived at Lakeview 3 days before Thanksgiving. The drive from the airport wound through bare birch trees and low gray sky, and when the house finally appeared through the windshield, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. The porch was dusty. The air inside smelled of cedar and cold. I lit a fire in the stone hearth and sat in front of it for a long time, not doing anything, just letting the warmth arrive. The next morning, I began setting things in order. Fresh linens on every bed, the long oak dining table positioned to face the lake window, one white tablecloth, chairs arranged evenly, every place the same distance from center, no side table, no overflow seating, everyone equal. That thought alone was enough to make me stand still for a moment. By afternoon, gravel crunched in the driveway. Aunt Patrice stepped out in a long wool coat with a pie balanced in both hands and a scarf flying behind her in the wind. "Your great-uncle would be so proud of you," she said, pulling me into a long hug. Her voice broke on the last word. I let myself hold on. Joel arrived an hour later with red wine and a bundle of dried herbs he'd picked up at a farm stand on the way. "Thought it might make the place feel warmer," he said, holding them out a little shyly. It felt like an apology for years of silence, offered without having to name itself. Priya's flight was delayed by 2 hours, but she came through the front door at dusk like she'd been blown in by the wind. "I brought 3 kinds of cheese and absolutely no plan," she announced, dropping her bag and opening her arms. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and forgotten. By the time darkness settled over the lake, the house felt different. Coats draped over chairs, voices overlapping softly across rooms, the smell of something warm already starting on the stove, a house full of people who had chosen to be there. The next morning, I was slicing pears in the kitchen when I heard small footsteps on the staircase. Maisie appeared in the doorway in her puffy pink vest, holding a folded piece of paper to her chest. Renee stood just behind her, hands in her cardigan pockets, watching. "I made you something," Maisie said, and handed me the paper carefully with both hands. It was a drawing of the house, the lake behind it, a curl of smoke from the chimney. In the foreground, a row of figures holding hands. My name was written above one of them in careful, uneven letters. I knelt down. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my neck without saying anything. Over her shoulder, Renee gave me a small, tired smile that held a whole story inside it. I showed them the upstairs room with the round window that looked out over the lake. Maisie pressed her nose to the glass. "It looks like a snow globe," she whispered. My great-uncle used to say the same thing. We were just heading back downstairs when headlights swept across the front windows. I stopped. Everyone I'd invited was already here. A car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a dark jacket, holding a folded note in his hand. My stomach tightened. It was Noah, someone I'd known years ago, briefly and then not at all, a structural engineer with a steady way of listening that had always made me feel less invisible. We'd lost touch after Marcus. I hadn't thought about him in a long time. "I didn't invite you," I said quietly, standing in the doorway. "I know," he said. He held out the folded note. I opened it. Inside, in small, careful handwriting, "Uncle Noah, please come to Maine. Aunt Claire needs someone who stays." I looked up. "Maisie wrote this." He nodded. "When a kid writes you a letter like that, you don't ignore it." I stepped back. "Come in." He walked through the door slowly, and the warmth of the house wrapped around him. No one asked who he was. Priya handed him a glass of wine. Aunt Patrice patted his arm like she'd known him for years. The room simply made space. Thanksgiving morning arrived in snow. Soft, quiet flakes drifting past the lake window. The kind of morning that makes everything feel held. Priya commandeered the kitchen with jazz playing and a wooden spoon in each hand. Joel and Maisie constructed a centerpiece out of pine cones they'd gathered from the porch. Aunt Patrice guarded the oven with the focused calm of someone who had strong opinions about turkey. Renee sat at the counter with coffee, laughing at something Priya said. Really laughing, the way people do when they've been holding their breath and finally stopped. Noah sat by the fire, reading. He looked up every so often, not intrusively, just checking. By early afternoon, the house smelled like everything warm. Roasted garlic, cinnamon, butter, wood smoke. For the first time in longer than I could trace, I felt full before we'd even sat down. We gathered for a photo by the big window, lake behind us, snow still falling. Maisie grabbed my hand at the last second and leaned in. Someone shared the photo in a family group thread without thinking much of it. My phone buzzed once, then again, then in a rapid, unstoppable sequence. I already knew who it was. Priya glanced at the screen, then at me. "You've earned this," she said. "Pick up." My hand was steady as I hit speaker. My mother's voice filled the kitchen immediately, sharp and bewildered. "Claire, what is going on? Whose house is that? Why is everyone in Maine?" "It's mine," I said. A long, hollow silence. "That's the family property," my father said, voice stiffening. "It was," I said. "Raymond signed it to me 7 years ago. I have the paperwork." My mother's voice shifted in the way it always did when control was slipping. "So you excluded us after everything we've sacrificed?" "You excluded me first," I said quietly. "Your message made that clear." Another silence, heavier this time. "I'm not punishing anyone," I continued. "I'm just choosing myself, probably for the first time." Noah stood, walked over, and placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. Then he took the phone calmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartley," he said, "Claire is surrounded by people who chose to be here. If that's painful to hear, it might be worth thinking about why." My parents had nothing to say to that, just the sound of breath and something older beneath it, an entitlement meeting its edge. Finally, my father said, "We're coming up." "Drive safely," I said, and ended the call. The room was quiet for a second. "That," said Joel slowly, "was a long time coming." Aunt Patrice crossed the room and held my face in both hands. the way she used to when I was small. Maisie pulled at my sleeve. "Are you okay?" I knelt down to her level. "Yes," I said. "Actually, yes." They arrived the next morning. My parents stood on the porch in their good coats, faces pale, eyes moving quickly across the house and the people inside it like they were looking for a version of events they could manage. "We need to speak privately," my mother said. I brought them into the study. The afternoon light fell across Raymond's old desk, and the room felt like it was paying attention. I opened the folder of property documents and set them on the desk without drama. Then I talked. Not loudly, not accusingly. I simply named what I had lived through. 30 years of being the one who adjusted, who stepped aside, who waited. I let the facts sit on the table between us without apology. For once, there was nothing for them to redirect. No Kyle to pivot toward, no spotlight to shift. Just the quiet room and the truth and the paper proving the rest. They didn't have much to say, which told me more than anything they could have offered. That evening, after everything had settled into the corners of the house, we gathered around the long table. The lake outside had gone silver in the last light. Snow still drifted slowly past the window. Maisie placed her drawing in the center of the table. The house, the lake, all of us with our hands connected. I looked around at each face. Aunt Patrice refilling glasses, Joelle telling a terrible joke that made Renee groan and smile at the same time, Priya gesturing wildly about something, Noah listening to Maisie explain a very serious theory about where geese go in winter. No extra tables, no invisible hierarchy, no one performing for anyone else. I felt something release in my chest, something that had been clenched for so long I'd stopped noticing the tension. It left quietly, the way old things do when they finally have permission to go. I had spent years waiting for someone to save me a seat. This year, I built the whole table. If you've ever had to choose yourself over the place you were taught to belong, you're not alone. Share what that looked like for you in the comments. And if stories like this find you when you need them, subscribe. There's always room at this table.